Well, folks, this is what is it, day 16 of the RPGA RPG a day challenge for the RPG Brigades 2017, whatever. Starting to blend together here, folks. I think, you know what, and truth is, I looked at 14, 15, and 16 and thought, gee, I could just do an homage and all three of them at once, but then I don't know. I'm new at this. I'm not trying to violate the spirit here. Okay, so question 16. Which RPG do you enjoy using as is? Well, just a handful of a dozen or more. I don't think there's any one right or wrong question, and that applies to every one of these questions so far. No right or wrong. Some systems, as going back to looking at yesterday, day 15's entry, some systems are easily adaptable. They're adaptable prone. They're easily you can adapt to other game systems. You can take those mechanics and those rules and overlay them with the story arc, the story element of another game system and work just fine. And then there's some that you can't do that with because they just don't mesh, and they don't mesh for really good reasons. And others, they just reek to be played the way they are. Now, I've done a little bit of blurbs on this one, Space Opera. For those of you who ever seen it or heard about it, this is the original set. It came out when it first came out, and I got my hands on it, and I've been lucky to hold on to it. It doesn't disappear in several moves in storage. The copyright is 1980. 1980. I was, good Lord, 13. I was 13 when I bought this set. 13. Yeah, that was a long time ago, folks. I'll be 51 next month for those that keep a score. Anyway, the set of rules for Space Opera are not unique. I'm not going to say they're unique, but they are applicable to the game system fairly well. And it doesn't lend itself, Space Opera itself doesn't lend itself for using, say, the D20 system from Star Wars. Although you could do it, there's actually a lot more in kind between this system and Star Wars than a number of others. Traveller came out about the same time as this, and it has a different set of nuances to it. The rules do not apply well to Space Opera, but as any game system, what makes if we take away the story arc, the storyline, what makes it what it is, then you have a set of mechanics and a set of base rules that let you play a science fiction, environment of your making. So you could easily say this is the what, you know, uh, dark matter express, whatever, and I like it playing it by itself the way it is. It takes a minute sometimes to, first off, to reintegrate myself into its style of system, its style of play, and introducing it to newer players. One of the hard parts about doing that is I can't loan them the books. I'm sorry, I won't loan them my books. I'll let them pre-use them there at the table, but they're not going to walk off with them. And unless they want to pony up the money for copies, which I have done in the past, I don't do that much anymore because this is an older set of books. The material used in them, there's a reason there's tape here. It's not that I'm trying to protect the binding. It's starting to split, which these will tend to do. The paper itself is next grade paper when it comes to gaming material. The stuff that they use today, there's a reason a book costs $50 is because they're using glossy paper and color artwork and hardbacks and so on and so on and so on. Well, they didn't have they didn't have that resources back then, and we were able to get things like this for I don't know what the heck I paid for it. I don't think it's listed. I want to say I only paid like 10-12 bucks for this set, and it came in a box. And the box, actually, I don't have the box anymore, which is a shame. And I don't have the character sheet. There was a couple player character cards and stuff that came in it, if I remember right, for cheat sheets kind of thing. A mobile hand, sort of like what your Dungeon Master screen does. And they disappeared, and I'll never find them again. So I don't loan it out. I don't let people get copies out of it no more because I don't want to put it through that anymore. It's just too old and precious to me. Now you can get PDF versions of it, I'm sure. I don't know. Then it brings us to me, my second choice of play it as is MechWarrior. And when you mention MechWarrior, it's BattleTech it's the RPG element of BattleTech. I recently seen, I think it was RuneSlinger. He was going over one of his picks, and it was called the Renegade Legion, and it's produced by FASA. It also produced this, and oddly enough, this too. And they had a really good, talented pool of people. And one of the elements, as RuneSlinger pointed out, that drew me into these game systems was the story. It wasn't enough to tell you about the tank. They want to give you the history of this particular model of tank and how it was built. This battle mech, its nuances and its quirks. And so when you got the set of rules that run it, its stats, and then you had a file and a beautiful picture of it to go with it. The rules themselves are interchangeable to a slight degree, and I found it awkward to run the battle mech. If you want to fight battle mech, you want to take battle mechs and fight them. You fight them on a tabletop board, just like as a war game, and it has a different set of mechanics, a different set of rules. Matter of fact, the rule book for the BattleTech stuff is about 80 pages, about yay thick, and here's the book for the RPG version, and there's a reason for that, because you've got so many more nuances, so many more elements to apply in an RPG than you do in a tabletop war game. It's just what it is. And so BattleTech was originally created as a tabletop war game by FASA, but in the process of creating the source books, and one of these days I'm going to review that stuff because it's an awesome system, a lot of beautiful stuff in there, and why not, right? I have it. Why not share it? Anyway, the mechanics for the game system was suited for tabletop wargaming, but it was not suited for RPG, for role playing. And yet, the storyline behind the game system was so deep, so beautiful, and so enriched that people cried out, "I want to play that as a character. I want to be a character in that." And so, the people at FASA responded and came out with the books for the RPG, MechWarrior, the BattleTech role-playing game. And they also had another version that's the Secession Wars, I believe it is, and it's more like a Command and Conquer, where it takes things to an even larger scale, and you're not on a personal level, you're on a commander level kind of thing. And then there was 2 or 3 other stuff, but we look at the game mechanics, and we talked about recently, artwork inspires you, and blah blah blah, and I'll tell you what, I don't know. FASA has people together. They had their ducks in a row, and they knew what they were going to do. And they had things like, how can you not either empathize, or sympathize with that particular scenario? I mean, come on, that's just you just begs to go, what the heck did that guy do to piss off this other guy? Or what's that other, what kind of diminutive SOB is this other dude? And then for those mechanically minded people, the one that really likes the detail of the stuff, I mean, even in an RPG, we still see this sort of level of graphics. I mean, come on, right? I'm just saying. Now, as I said, play as it is. You got to play it as it is. You have to play these rules as they are, because you can't take. You can try. I've tried. You can take the mechanics from, say, Star Wars or Dungeons and Dragons and overlay them with this, but MechWarrior doesn't have a lot of elements that those others do. You don't have the Force. You don't have the Force. You don't have magic. You just don't. And you don't have alignments. You don't have religion things getting involved in. You stay out of my breakfast, kitty. Yeah, that's your kitty. So, trying to get in my breakfast cereal. And so, it's just better to use them. You know, That's characters, right? I love them. Anyway, I'll leave it the way it is. That's what I said. All right. And then, of course, they built on themselves. Now, this will be an homage to FASA because I'm telling you, the earlier stuff was fairly decent, and then they built on them. It got better. They improved and kept improving, and then I don't know what they did. I think Runeslinger pointed out, he says that most of those guys went over to the video games industry, and I can understand why. At the same time, you just kind of like, you guys were doing so good, man. You had several key hit. You know, that was one thing different about FASA as well. You know, West End Games at the time was cranking out Star Wars. TSR was doing Dungeons and Dragons. They had a few other good lines. Then they were gradually bought out by different outfits. And eventually, the Wizards of the Coast ends up owning everything. Right? That's how the big businesses work. They just got bought out. I'm guessing that's what happened to these guys too, which is a shame. I don't know the actual details of it. I just know that when we went from, the earlier stuff. Then Renegade Legion and BattleTech and MechWarrior, and then Shadowrun came out, and Shadowrun took the picture levels and the graphics even more in depth, but the mechanics, the storyline, the the cool factor just continued itself. You could almost feel what's going on in this world. You could envision yourself in it. You could see our modern world actually rolling over into this. There was a brief window in 1999 when I was kind of praying and hoping that when the new millennia came and everybody's talking crazy talk about how things were going to turn around and roll over, and that maybe something along these lines would take place. This was a great what if story, and the mechanics are actually fairly easy. They're typical of most of our game systems of the 80s and 90s, and with some new elements to it. Mostly areas of gaming that hadn't been, like hacking and cyber warfare, stuff that hadn't been approached before in a game system. And then they made a good job of melding the fantasy with the future in this kind of retro cyberpunk world. I mean, I'm just, come on, right? So you almost have to play this game system as it is without trying to adapt it, because unless you're adapting little minor things to suit your campaign, that's traditional, that's accepted. But actually changing this, trying to make it into something it's not, it's a shame, and I don't think it would do well. I personally recommend using it as it sits, even in the version that it is. I mean, I know that there's a newer version coming out, blah, 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 or has come out, and nobody's told me about a new reversion of this, but, and I'll tell you what, I don't know what company ended up with the rights to this, if anybody did. This is a classic. It needs reintroduced. I should have had this one when I was doing the other question. But there you have it, my friends. Which RPGs do you enjoy using as is? That's those. I've got a couple others I would love to use as is, and wouldn't change a thing. They did all that for me. Why would I go out of my comfort zone and utilize my valuable time to rebuild the wheel?